Hello friends, today's topic for discussion is evolution theories. The points for the discussion in this video are what is evolution and the different theories of evolution. So let's get started. What is evolution? According to the theory of organic evolution, all living forms have evolved from some single common ancestors. This is called monophyletic origin. Through the process of gradual modification, adaptations, and the natural selection over 1.5 million, different species have evolved from the common ancestral forms. This process is termed as evolution or organic evolution. So, organic evolution is the process by which simple organisms gave rise to the complex organisms in course of time. It is an extremely intimate phenomenon occurring in the living organisms since the life appeared on this planet. Theories of evolution. In this video, we'll discuss about the Lamarck's theory, Darwin's theory, and the mutation theories in detail. So let's get started with one of the theories. Before discussing about the Lamarck's theory, we should be aware about the person who discovered it. Jean Lamarck was a French naturalist. He was born on August 1, 1744. He was a soldier, biologist, and an early proponent of the idea that biological evolution occurred and proceeded in accordance with the natural laws. It had also coined the term biology and invertebrates. His theory was published in 1809 in his book Philosophic Zoology. This theory is commonly referred to as Lamarckism or Lamarckian theory. The main central idea of Lamarckism is that characteristics acquired by organisms during their lifetime in response to the environmental conditions are passed on to their offsprings. Now let's discuss about what is the Lamarck's theory is there. The main points for the Lamarck's theory were the organisms and the organs have a natural tendency to continuously increase in size generation after generation. The continuous changes in the environmental conditions directly influence the way of living, habits, and nature of the organisms, and it tends to affect their structural organization accordingly. The use of certain parts increases while that of the certain other parts decreases. The growth of less used parts declines while that of the better used parts progresses. The characters acquired by an organism during its lifetime are inherited to the next generation. In every generation, some new characters were acquired or the older ones keep on increasing or improving. As a result, after a number of generations, the species it gets modified into a new one. Now let's discuss about some of the evidence which were in the favor of the Lamarckian theory. The first is the giraffe's neck. According to the Lamarck, the giraffe have evolved from some deer-like ancestors who have short neck and forelimbs, and they grazed on the grass. Due to the climate or the grassland change, the leaves of the high trees were the only food available to the giraffe ancestors. The continuous stretching of the neck to reach the tree leaves resulted in the gradual elongation of the neck and the forelimbs. The increase was transmitted to the similar efforts which resulted in the long neck of the giraffe. The second evidence is the feet of the modern horse or the deer. They have developed the power of running through continuous efforts to escape from the enemies. Therefore, the lengthening of the limbs and of the middle toe into the forelimb and the hind limbs have taken place. The third evidence was in the support was the loss of the limbs in the snakes. According to the Lamarck, the snake ancestors were limbed and lizard-like. Out of the fear of the mammals, who were more powerful, the ancestors of the snake they started creeping on the jungle floor and they started living in the narrow burrows. So, for creeping, they started stretching their body, which gradually became elongated. The legs, which were of no use, they gradually disappeared. Now let's discuss about the criticism of the Lamarckism also. The antagonists of the Lamarckism, they doubted the inheritance of the acquired characters and they quoted several examples in support of their contention. The objections against the Lamarck theory were the tendency to increase in size has been noted in many forms, but many times the evolution shows reduction in the size. For example, in angiosperms, the trees are primitive and the shrubs, herbs, and the grasses they have evolved later and are more advanced. The new organs develop where the organisms feel their need is also not true. If the development of the new organs or the structure it depends on the desire, then why a man who has a long desire to fly like birds have not evolved in the wings? The August Weismann in 1904 in his famous experiment had cut off the tails of the rats for about 80 generations, but the tailless offsprings were never born. The Pavlov, a Russian physiologist, he trained a mice or a dog to come to food on hearing the bell, but the training was inherited. So, through these objections, the Lamarck theory is now considered as an erroneous assumption. The new Lamarckism was discovered by the protagonist of the Lamarckism. So, let's discuss about the new Lamarckism also. The protagonists of the Lamarckisms have molded the theory in the term of the genetics by holding that the acquired characters which become incorporated in the genotype are heritable and accumulate the generation after generation. These leads to the evolution of the new species. This is termed as Neo-Lamarckism. It provides the germ cells are influenced by the environmental changes. The germ cells may carry the acquired or somatic variations to the offsprings. It was proved by Harrison's experiment. The germ cells may be affected directly by the environmental factors. It was also proved in the Towers experiment. Somatic characters are the result of interaction between the genes and the environment, which means the environment does affect the gene expression. Charles Robert Darwin. Before starting about the second theory, that was Darwinism or Darwin theory, we should be aware about the discoverer who discovered the Darwin theory. He was Charles Darwin. He was the most famous evolutionist, was born in 1809 at Shrewsbury, England. In 1831, at the age of 22, he was appointed naturalist upon a World Survey ship of British government, which was HMS Beagle. For 5 years on this ship, Darwin explored the fauna and the flora of a number of continents and the islands, and he collected numerous specimens also. He believed in the theory of special creation, after which a new idea of the evolution of the new species by natural selection came into his mind. Now let's discuss about the Darwinism or the Darwin theory. The main postulates of the Darwin theory were: the first one was the enormous fertility in the living beings. All living beings have an amazing fertility, and every organism has an innate desire to produce its own progeny for the continuity of the race. The productivity of all living organisms is far beyond the ultimate number which can possibly survive. The space and the available food supply is limited, but the number of organisms increase in geometric ratio. For example, the paramecium it divides 3 times in 48 hours. If all its offsprings are going to survive and multiply, then in 5 years the mass of the paramecium will be equal to 10,000 times the mass of the earth. The second point was the struggle for existence. According to Darwin, the resources like space, air, food, water, minerals, and light on the earth are the limited, but the number of organisms increase many folds due to the overproduction. There is an intense struggle and competition for the existence amongst the organisms for obtaining the optimum resources. Like the struggle is going to be among the individuals of the same species, the struggle between the members of different species, the struggle of the living beings with the change of the environment, such as heat, cold, drought, flood, storms, famine, light, food, and the shelter. The third point was there as the main postulates was the variation under nature. The offsprings are similar to their parents and also exhibit some resemblance to each other, but they are not identical. They differ to some extent in shape, size, color, and behavior. No two individuals are identical except the identical or monozygotic twins. The next was the natural selection or the survival of the fittest. Darwin believed that as man selects the animals or plants with desired characters, in the same way the nature selects or favors only those individuals which have more favorable variations and are the best adapted to the environment. The less fit or the unfit organisms are left out by the selection. The individuals which survive, they show high selective value, and in the course of time they develop various adaptive modifications to suit the changed conditions of the life. Such selection was called the natural selection by Darwin and the survival of the fittest by Herbert Spencer. The last point was the origin of the species. In the course of long period of time, the best fitted and suitable individuals they survived and became adjusted to the nature. As environment is very ever changing and thus a new adaptation appears in the organisms, the descendants after several generations, they became quite distinct from their ancestors. In this way, a new species appear. Now let's discuss some of the evidence which were there in the support of the Darwinism or the Darwin theory. First is the artificial selection. There is a close parallelism between the natural selection and artificial selection. By controlled breeding and natural selection for several generations, many new varieties of the plants and new species, races, or the breeds of the domestic animals have been developed. New races of the dogs, horses, pigeons, poultry, sheep, pigs, goats, etc. have been developed by man by artificial selection. If man can produce new varieties in a short time, nature with more time and vast resources can easily produce new species by selection. The second support was the mimicry or protective colorization. Mimicry and protective colorization, as seen in the certain animals, can be achieved only by gradual changes occurring side by side, both in the model and in the mimic occupying the same area. The next was the correlation between the position of the nectaries in flowers and length of proboscis of pollinating insects. This relationship, two different organisms, can evolve gradually and can be explained by natural selection. And the fourth evidence was the extinct forms. Study of the fossils, they shows that new organisms are formed regularly and older ones they become extinct from time to time. The resemblance of fossils to the present day living forms is indicative of their gradual modification. Now let's discuss about some of the drawbacks of the Lamarckism or of the Darwinism or the Darwin's theory. The first was the theory of phonogenesis. Darwin, he failed to explain the mechanism of inheritance or the mode of transmission of the variations to the next generation. In 1868, Darwin proposed the theory of panogenesis to explain this phenomenon. According to this theory, every cell or organ or part of the body, it produces minute hereditary particles which are termed as panogenes or gemmules. These were carried by the blood and they deposited in the gametes. The next was the inheritance of the small variations. Darwin held that small variations from the raw materials for evolution, but occurrence of the small variations in those organs can be useful to the organisms only when these are fully developed and functional. For example, the wings of the birds in its initial stage as a small structure would have been of no use to the ancestors of the birds. The third was the existence of the vestigial organs. According to the natural selection, only the useful organs are selected and they are favored in the struggle for the existence. The existence of the vestigial organs cannot be explained because these are of no use to the proboscis. The next were your overspecialization. Overspecialization of the some organs in certain animals like antlers of the deer and the tusk of the elephants beyond the stage of usefulness, rather causing hindrance in daily life, they can't be explained by natural selection. So these were the few of the drawbacks of the Darwin's theory. Neo-Darwinism. So now we are going to discuss about the Neo-Darwinism. What is Neo-Darwinism? Neo-Darwinism, or which we can be termed as the modern concept of evolution in the modification and elaboration of the Darwin's theory of natural selection. It was also termed as modern synthetic theory of evolution. It was elaborated by Huxley and the team in the fields of the cell, biology, and molecular biology and the genetics. It explains the various factors and mechanism for the appearances of the variations in the members of population. According to Neo-Darwinism, the variations may be heritable or germinal and non-heritable or somatic. Only the germinal variations are passed on to the next generation. The population are the units of the evolution and the gene pool of the population it evolves. The third theory of evolution was mutation theory. It was proposed by Hugo de Ries in 1901. According to this theory, new species arise from the pre-existing ones in the single gene by the sudden appearances of the distinct and discontinuous heritable changes. Hugo de Ries called such sudden distinct heritable changes as mutations, and Latin, if we talk about this word, has been taken from mutare, which means to change. Now let's discuss about the main postulates of the mutation theory. Mutations are sudden, large, and distinct discontinuous heritable changes. All organisms, they have an inherent tendency to change or to mutate. The individuals they showing the mutation, they are termed as mutants. Mutations are indeterminate, that is, they appear in all directions and may be useful or harmful. It may appear again and again, generation after generation. So, they provide more and more chances of selection by nature. This theory can explain the occurrence of the vestigial and even over-specialized organs also. The evidence which was there in the support of the mutation theory were the several mutants, the forms were observed after the Hugo de Ries discovery of mutation, and few examples are the appearance of the short-legged Ankan sheep to normal long-legged parents in 1871, appearance of the hornless Hereford cattle from normal horned parents in 1889 in a single generation, the birth of the hairless cats, dogs and the mice from normal parents, and the formation of the seedless variety of bananas. Here are some of the questions which are to be discussed. You can test yourself. Thank you so much for watching this video.